Dudes, what's happening? It's Trent here, and today I have a absolute beginner's guide to Adobe Photoshop. I did something similar to this with Sketchbook Pro, and a lot of people have been asking me, hey, could you give me like a hold me by the hand introduction to Adobe Photoshop? Over the course of the last 16 years, I've been learning Photoshop, and so I've picked up a few tricks and techniques, and it's overwhelming. So I wanted to start from the basics. And what you're going to find here is a shorter version. I have an extended version if you're really hardcore and you want to dig in on my Gumroad channel. You can find the link to that below. But for now, let's do it. Let's dig into Adobe Photoshop. This should work for CS5 and even current ones. I don't use anything super crazy or complex, but this should simplify a lot of things for you. This is really kind of for beginners. It's for people who have no real experience with digital painting and Photoshop. And I'm going to show you some of the advantages of Photoshop as opposed to some other software, and also some of the disadvantages. But for the most part, this isn't going to be a drawing tutorial. And if you're a more advanced user and you know your way around Photoshop, you know, there might be some things in here that'll help you, but for the most part, it's really going to be for the beginner. And I'm using, let's see, which version of Photoshop am I using here? Version 12 for CS5 extended. And what that means is it's got a lot of features that we probably don't really need for anything beyond just digital drawing. And I'm not really going to even dig into techniques here. This is really like a tour. This is like, look at all these buttons. What the heck do all these buttons do? I'm also going to cover a little bit with some of the quick keys and things like that. To get it out of the way, I'm using my current brush sets that I kind of created as a custom brush set. That is available in the link in the section below if you're interested in that sort of a thing. So first of all, let's start out with our tools panel over here on the left side. Now, before we can really do much, we need a new layer. So what we do is we can hit, I'm on a Mac, so I would hit Command Shift N, gives us this prompt, which is a new layer. I never really mess with anything in here until after the layer is created. As you can see, I had already created one, so I'm just going to cancel here, but it creates a new layer and puts it in your stack. Now that basically gives it some transparency. And you could also create a new layer by going over here and clicking New Layer. This will also tell you the shortcut command next to it. Now that we have a new layer, let's draw something on it. And obviously, you guys have probably already found the brush tool in the Windows or in the tool panel. And we have this set currently to the top color here, which is gray. If we wanted to switch that, it would be the one below it. Let's just go black and we draw something on here. Now, if you're using a mouse, you need to stop right now and go out and get yourself a Wacom tablet or something similar. That allows you to draw with pen pressure so that you can increase the pressure sensitivity as you're pressing. And these are very obvious things to people who work digitally. If it's new to you, then you're in the right place. So the next thing that we want to do, now that we have, let's say that we've drawn something on here, let's go to the top button. What does the top button up here in the window or the tool panel do? That's going to move that layer around. So what's nice about that is if you've drawn something on there and say you have something underneath it, let's go to the bottom layer and let's say that we have a red color. Now keep in mind, I had drawn with white on the layer above it. And then let's move that top layer around. Notice that it's selected. We're moving it around and it's moving on top of it. Think of it like it's got transparency where you don't draw anything. Now, one of the neat things about, we're going to dance around a little bit here. One of the neat things about layer effects is that you can actually create different types of properties for this layer. So you could set that to multiply and suddenly, ba-bam, wow, all of our white just turned completely transparent. And as a matter of fact, if we had something on this layer that was sort of half opacity, let's use black. it's going to literally multiply as if you're laying down like a watercolor or marker on top of it. And this is how you get a lot of marker type of watercolor effects. You could also do a color burn, which would pretty much, as you can see, oh, the quick key for this button right here, the move tool, by the way, is just the command key. And so, see, I don't even think about it. So I just kind of like accidentally started moving things around, or quickly moving things around, because to me, it's sort of second nature. It's like playing piano. It's like the person who's played piano for 15 years doesn't really probably think much about which keys he's pressing. It just sort of becomes automatic. Now, if you wanted to just move a specific thing, let's not mess around too much with layer effects. Let's go back to normal. Let's say that we wanted to just move a selection. Let's say that we wanted to just move this little part right here. We just create a selection using the selection tool. And then again, you could use the move tool to move that selection. Now, if you select outside of that selection, it'll move the whole layer. But if you select inside of that selection, it'll just move that little piece. Again, these are just, I'm really just going to cover the tools that I use for the most part. The other neat thing about selection tools is that you can create interesting shapes, and then using a airbrush or any kind of brush, really. I'm going to use an airbrush because it just makes sense for what I'm trying to show you. You can create these masks, and these will create, you can use airbrush tool, or you could use any brush really to draw within the confines of that selection. Isn't that nifty? You could also hit Command D to deselect, or if you wanted to just keep the selection but see what you're doing, you can hit Command H and it'll hide. The easy way to remember that is that it's Command H is to hide your selection. That'll hide rulers or any guides or anything like that that you've created. Obviously up here, I like to set up my history so that I can see it. And I don't want it to be too prominent because I never really want to go back more than about 50. You can change those settings. Everything in Photoshop is customizable, and that's why it's overwhelming probably to a lot of people to use. The next item is the eyedropper tool. Now, I never click on the eyedropper tool. I always use the Option key. It's Alt, the Alt key on your Windows keyboard if you're using Windows. The color picker basically just allows you to select a color that's already on your screen. You can pull colors from another photo or another painting, or just from blended colors in your painting. And it makes that color the active color that you'll paint with. I also have my brushes set up for the button on my Wacom pen so that I can quickly grab whichever brush that I want. And I mostly just use whatever's in the top 10 of these. I don't usually like to shift around or go way down into my list, especially if I'm just straight up drawing and not relying on photo bashery or anything like that. Oh, I want to go back and touch base on one more feature of the brush tool here before we move on. So you also have a pencil tool, and that's like, I really never use this either because it's like a hard kind of a brush, a very hard-edged kind of a brush, and I tend to like the more softness of a brush, the brush tool, not the pencil tool. The color replacement tool, I never really mess around with, but the mixer brush tool can be very useful, especially if you're using it with a brush that has some spacing in between it. I like to use it with this one because you get some really interesting oily blending textures. There's also some other texture brushes. Specifically, one of my favorites for getting cool textures. This one's nice because it gives it a very natural chalky look, a smudged chalky look. And this is something that Photoshop used to be terrible at, by the way. And we used to have to superimpose photographs to try to get a grainy, natural, organic look. But nowadays you can just get that using the mixer feature. And I get that by holding it down and then dragging over to the mixer brush tool. And I encourage you to play around with different brushes with that if you're gonna play around with it. I'm gonna skip a couple because I just never use them. Eraser is obvious. But one thing to note is that if you have something underneath your layer, if you erase, it'll show up more. So this is really nice. A great combination that you can do is if you're drawing with really wide airbrush strokes or something like that. Let's actually pick a color. And this is going to clash so bad. This is ugly, but it gets the point down, hopefully. You can actually sort of erase out some of your shapes. And this is sort of a kind of a technique that a lot of airbrush artists would use. So moving on, a smudged brush. Now this is interesting. The smudge brush doesn't really work very well with some of your more standard drawing brushes. It just kind of streaks it, you know? And this is almost useless. I mean, especially it'll bog down your computer. This thing is an overclocked computer too, overclocked MacBook Pro. And so it's still bogging it down. But if you pick a brush that has some spacing to it, again, I want to encourage you to try different brushes. It also really depends on what resolution you're painting in, but this one's pretty good for blending. Specifically, it's great for blending. This one, I never really use, yeah, I do use dodge and burn. But the way that I use dodge and burn is, and you see Ross Draws uses this a lot. But the way that I like to use dodge and burn is to do something like where I'll have a layer that's my dodge layer, and I'll create a new layer, and then I'll set that layer to color dodge, you know, and then I'll have another layer that's set to my burn layer. Color burn, where are you? Color burn. Text tool is pretty handy. I'll just do a quick overview of it because I use this for lettering things and whatnot. So, oh wow, some text. So I've written it, but look at how tiny that is. It's almost, you can't even read that. That is it's almost useless. So I'm going to use the text tool. And then I select the text that I just created. I hit Command All to select all that text. And now you can go up here and you can just press the up arrow to increase the size. Oh wow, some text. And if you want to see what it actually looks like, Command H will still keep it selected. You can hit Command T to transform, as with any selection. You can hit Command T and you can resize things. You could also go in here and it's only once you hit enter does it's still selected, I believe, but let's select it again and then hide it, and then we're going to change that color to something really gaudy here. And what's kind of neat about text is that you can actually go in and go into blending options, and these are all the features that I use for a lot of different stuff. I'll create outlines. Let's make an outline that's got some orange, and let's fatten up that outline. So that outline really just goes around the edge of all of it. Again, you might not need a lot of this for what you're doing. There are other things you can do, like create drop shadows and things like that. Because it's on its own layer, you can move it around however you want. So I've created another color here, and of course none of this is really working. Now notice that I can move this layer around and get that dodge and burn effect to affect that too, which is kind of neat. All these are things that you can use to in your own paintings as well to get some interesting results, and I encourage you to play around with it. Really, you shouldn't put too much pressure on yourself when you're first learning new software. The most important thing is to just learn to get comfortable with what the tools do. Find 3 or 4 tools that do what you sort of expect them to do. For me, I would suggest just finding the hardest part is just going to be going to brush and finding a brush that works well for you, that's comfortable for you. The quickest way to increase or decrease your brush size is using the bracket keys. Here you can see the left bracket key will lower the size of your brush, and the right bracket key will increase the size of your brush. If you do have my brush set, just try out the very first one, the top one, and just do a little bit of just, draw something with it, the tools, This is going to be ridiculous. Once you reach a point where you begin to feel confident that, oh, this is sort of like working with paper, and I want to know some more functions of this, then like the next thing that you should do is play around with creating different effects for layers. So for instance, you could switch that to multiply and go, well, let's say if I wanted to add a little bit of color to that, like what would I do for like a flesh tone? There are other ways to get colors, by the way. If you go up here to swatches, you could pull colors directly from that, or you could pull up a photograph of a drawing that you really like the colors already. There are a number of different ways that you could create colors or get colors to look in a certain, maybe there's a photograph or another painting that you just really like the way that that artist used their colors, and you can pull that up and then just hit the option key to color select, and then put those colors into your own drawing. Bam. It's so easy. It's so easy. So I've been kind of like doing this little derpy little face doodle while we're talking and while I'm explaining how to use some of the tools. It's not really like a painting, it's not really even a drawing, but I feel like I would be jipping you guys if you come to my channel for art, and I'm not really even posting any art, it's all just tool stuff. So I'm gonna do a quick little doodle, and then I'll come back after that doodle's done. The doodle done. Get the doodle done. And so that's my whole process. That's kind of, the secrets to, a good number of my techniques. There are a few other things that I would have liked to have covered, and possibly in an intermediate Photoshop course, I'll go a little bit more in detail on some of those techniques and processes that I use. A lot of it really just comes with time. If your drawing doesn't look like mine, that's really great. That's actually a wonderful thing, because that means that you're finding things that you like about your way of doing things. The most important thing that you do is build confidence in just working digitally. Promise yourself that you're going to sit down for about 30 minutes every night, even if it's only 5 nights a week, and just spend time with it. The more time that you spend with Photoshop, the more you'll grasp it. And work from a place of comfort, work from a place of building confidence. If you can keep that consistent, then eventually you'll reach a point where you're possibly even teaching other people. And that's a great way to learn too. Teach others the things that you learn. Find yourself a social group, get involved with them, and kind of share ideas on techniques and processes. It's not a competition, but a little bit of competition, a little bit of like trying to show up your buddies is a good thing, because it keeps you coming back and kind of going, oh dude, how did you do that? And then that kind of keeps the excitement going. So what you've been watching is really a condensed, shortened version of the full tutorial. I didn't want to do an hour-long video for YouTube. If you are hardcore and you would like to dig in a little bit deeper and get the PSD and see a little bit more of an in-depth process of how I achieve the look and style of what I do, you can go to my Gumroad channel and pick up this tutorial, or you can just get the full box set of tutorials this is for volume 3 will contain this as well. Anyway, dudes, that's going to pretty much end it for me for this workshop. I want to thank you so much for stopping by and for your support in this. And dudes, as always, when you're learning Photoshop, remember to learn Photoshop with passion. I'll catch you later. All right, ciao.